week 3 of the fantasy football season, and his quarterback starts sit every matchup this week. Thursday night, Miami Dolphins at the Bills. Tua was a sit for me in this game. Tua, we know he's good at home, but on the road, going back the last couple years now, he really hasn't gotten the job done. I know these Thursday night games are usually high scoring. We know they got good offense on paper, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, but it really hasn't translated on the field, where Achane's been the only consistent player for this Miami Dolphin team. So this week, Tua sit, Josh Allen to start each and every week. I know last week he took a backseat Allen. He didn't do much. James Cook carried this team to victory and a blowout victory pretty easily early in that ball game versus the New York Jets. But I think this one, Josh Allen goes out there, bounces back with a big performance. Cincinnati Bengals at the Minnesota Vikings. The matchup of the backup quarterbacks, Joe Burrow, he's out 3 months with the turf toe. He's getting surgery. Jake Browning coming in. And Browning, when he filled in for Burrow a few years ago, he actually went 4-3. But this week on the road, tough matchup for his first start. He's someone I'm not going to trust. When the buys kick in, maybe. And if he could continue to get going, is someone you could trust, but he's not. And Carson Wentz, he's filling in for Jay McCarthy. He went down with a knee injury after he got hit hard in that ball game, sacked 6 times versus the Atlanta Falcons. So Carson Wentz this week is a sit, even though I think he might be the better option with his gunslinger mentality for Minnesota. Houston Texans at the Jacksonville Jaguars, CJ Stroud is sit. Stroud, the upside just hasn't been there now. Well, last season and this season, I know he's got a nice number 1 wide receiver in Nico Collins, but the secondary guys, he's not getting the football to. Xavier Hutchinson, Jaden Higgins, Christian Kirk's been out the first 2 games of the season. Dalton Schultz at the tight end position. So like I said, CJ Stroud, there hasn't been much upside and not much going for CJ Stroud. So he's a sit even in a decent matchup at a mediocre D. Fringe option is Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence so far, he's been all right. Last week he threw 3 touchdowns. And the funny thing is, Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter haven't done anything. So he's getting going in this Liam Cohen offense, where last year we saw Baker and the Bucs put up a big season offensively, and Trevor Lawrence trying to get back to form like he was a few seasons ago. So Lawrence this week in a matchup versus middle of the pack defense is a fringe option. Indianapolis Colts at the Tennessee Titans. Daniel Jones, he's been off to a monster start the first 2 weeks of the season, even though I could see it definitely be fluky. But this week with a lot of injuries at the quarterback position and Daniel Jones playing good football, and he's got obviously rushing upside in a division matchup at the Tennessee Titans, he's a start. It's not like his receivers are going out there and put up numbers, but you got a stud tight end in Tyler Warren. You got one of the better backs in the backfield, Jonathan Taylor. And Daniel Jones, he's been a goal line type of quarterback where he QB sneaks a lot. So this week at Tennessee, even though I think it's going to be a grinded out game, and I also could see Jones go the other way and not have a good game, but this week I'm going to have him as a start going off the first 2 games of the year. Cam Ward is sit. Ward, I think, is going to get better as the year goes on, but there's not much going on over there in Tennessee. The only 2 reliable guys, Calvin Ridley and Tony Pollard, and this Indianapolis Colts defense has been a solid unit for the most part so far in the year. We're going Vegas Raiders is at the Commanders. Geno Smith is sit this week. Geno had problem with good accuracy. Obviously, he versed a good defense in the Chargers last week, the vicious pass rush. And this Raider offensive line isn't that good. And Brock Bowers, the number 1 option in this passing game, not 100%, wearing a knee brace. He was hobbling around in that ball game, but got through it last week. And Geno Smith, he's got to get used to this team a little bit more, I think, even though obviously he's used to playing with Pete Carroll, having his best seasons in Seattle with him now here in Vegas. But Geno Smith, not an option this week. Now to the Commanders, Jaden Daniels, not looking probable he's going to play in this game. But Daniels, we know he's a gamer. We know he's a tough guy. There's still a chance he might play in this one. So if he plays, obviously he's a start, one of the better quarterbacks in fantasy football coming into the year. And if he don't play, Marcus Mariota is going to start at quarterback. And Mariota is nothing more than a backup over the last couple seasons, bouncing around the league. Even though he's been with Washington now in his second year, he's a sit. Los Angeles Rams at the Eagles, Matthew Stafford is sit. Obviously, Stafford, he's got great potential upside week in and week out with 2 stud receivers in Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams. But this is a tough matchup at the Philadelphia Eagles and Kyren Williams in that backfield. You know, he's going to get points as well. That takes away from Stafford's production. So Matthew Stafford, if it was a better matchup, I would put him in the lineup this week, but a tough matchup at Philadelphia, even though the Rams know they got to put points on the board. He's a sit this week. Jalen Hurts a start. I know the first 2 games we haven't seen much from Hurts, especially passing the football. Last week he didn't even have 100 yards throwing the football as Hurts, but that tush push obviously and his rushing ability is what gets him fantasy points. So this week versus the Rams, even though they've been a good unit defensively so far, Hurts is a start each and every week with his upside. Atlanta Falcons at the Carolina Panthers. Michael Penix Jr. week 1, he had a good ball game in a tough loss versus Tampa. And last week it was the Bijan Robinson show where Penix didn't have to do much. So this week in a good matchup at Carolina, I'm still not 100% sold. He's a starting option, is Michael Penix. He's a fringe option to me because this game could be a Bijan type of game again where they get off to an early start, have the lead, and run the football more than pass it. Bryce Young is sit. I know Bryce Young last week, he worked his way into points where they were chasing points. The whole second half at the Arizona Cardinals was this Carolina Panther team. But this Falcon defense must improve. And we saw him last week, got to the quarterback early and often, J.J. McCarthy, and injuring him with 6 sacks in this game. So this week, Bryce Young versus a tough defense, and he's always got to rely on garbage time. Isn't a good thing for fantasy, so he's a sit. Pittsburgh Steelers at the New England Patriots. Aaron Rodgers, week 1, went out there, had a monster game versus former team, the New York Jets in New York, 4 touchdowns. And then last week, a mediocre game to poor game it was for Rodgers. So this week in the matchup in the middle of the pack, defense of the Patriots, he's a fringe option. We know they got good weapons on the offense, but at 41 years old, you can't expect weekly Rodgers to put up big numbers. Drake May a start for the Patriots. First 2 games of the year, he's looked good, Drake May. He's a quarterback spreading the football out. He's got some rushing upside as well as Drake May. And this week versus Steelers team, that 2 games now to start the year. 32 points to the Jets in week 1, and then last week 31 points they gave up. This defense is a defense you could actually throw on, even with all these Pro Bowlers on it. Green Bay Packers at the Cleveland Browns, Jordan Love a start. This offense is playing well in the early going for this Green Bay Packer team, even though I think the defense has been more impressive for Green Bay than their offense in the early going. So Jordan Love spreading the football out. He's obviously got a collection of wide receivers, not a true number 1, but Tucker Kraft to me is the number 1 option in this passing game. So this week at the Cleveland Browns, even though their defense isn't totally horrible, I think Love's the start again. Joe Flacco will sit. Joe Flacco, veteran quarterback, still could get the football down the field. But this Brown team, they're going to be a bad team, and I know they got good options in the passing game. Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, tight ends David Njoku, Harold Fannin Jr., but it's a tough matchup versus arguably the best defense in the league. And like I said, Joe Flacco, his upside isn't really that great for fantasy anyway. New York Jets, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Justin Fields in concussion protocol. Right now, it's not looking good he's going to play, but I'm going to list him if he does play in this game as a start. I know last week, even before the concussion, he didn't do much, but Fields with his rushing ability and upside, and the Jets most likely trailing in this game where he's going to throw and try to make plays with his legs, he will be a start. And Tyrod Taylor, if he is the starter in this game, he's a sit. He is one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league, no doubt about it. He's Tyrod Taylor, but he's not a guy, obviously, that's going to have fantasy value or much upside in a matchup at a mediocre Tampa Bay Buck defense. Baker Mayfield start each and every week. He's a gamer, Baker. Great weapons on this offense. Obviously, Mike Evans, Emeka Egbuka in his rookie season has really emerged so far in the early going and got Bucky Irvin, Rashad White out of the backfield. And this week, I know the Jet defense on paper pretty decent, but they've given up a lot of points in the first 2 weeks. Week 1, 34 to Pittsburgh, and then last week, an easy game it was for Buffalo. Denver Broncos at the Chargers. Bo Nix, I'm going to give him the start in this game. Bo Nix last week, he bounced back, had a good game with 27 fantasy points as Bo Nix, and now he might have found his number 2 wide receiver emerging in Troy Franklin. He had a big game, 8 catches, 89 yards, and found the end zone. And that was a game where Cortland Sutton didn't do much. So this week could be a mini high-scoring game between these 2 division rivals in the AFC West. And Bo Nix is a start, Justin Herbert a start. This offense, they've totally changed it around on Greg Roman this season. Pass first offense, Herbert, he threw the football a whole lot the first 2 weeks of the season. They're being more aggressive. They're using their 3 wide receiver sets a lot with Ladd McConkey, Keenan Allen back in the mix this season with the Chargers, and obviously Quentin Johnston. And it's worked out big time for this Charger team. So I think in this one, they're going to want to spread out Denver. And we even saw Daniel Jones go out there last week and have a big game versus one of the better defenses in the league. New Orleans Saints at the Seahawks, Spencer Rattler. He's going out there, he's competing, no doubt about it. He's made some plays. And the Saints team, first 2 weeks, they haven't been blown out. They've been a score away in both those games. But this week at Seattle, a defense that just went into Pittsburgh, had a dominant performance. You can't trust Rattler. He's a sit. Sam Darnold, the fringe option, still getting used to this playbook. Still getting used to, obviously, his receivers, Jackson Smith and Najigba. Cooper Kupp, Kenneth Walker, Charbonnet, the running backs in the backfield. And he's a fringe option to me. New Orleans, I know they're not a good defense, but Sam Darnold, I just don't think the upside is there very much. And we got to see more out of him. I know last season, monster year, but that was with Minnesota with all those great players in that offense. Now, Dallas Cowboys at the Chicago Bears. Dak Prescott to start. Last week, a big game for Dak. Him and CeeDee Lamb, they've always locked in, obviously. George Pickens got into the mix. He had a nice game, finding the end zone. 17 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And him and Jake Ferguson back at getting things going. So Dak Prescott, this is a talented offense over there in Dallas. And this could be another shootout between these two teams this week in Soldier Field, where both defenses really can't stop anyone. Caleb Williams to start. Last week, he had a pretty decent game, even though they got blown out at the Lions. And I'm talking in terms of fantasy football, not real life, where Williams put up some numbers where they got blown out 52-21 in that one. So Caleb Williams, they got all the pieces around them, and they got the offensive guru Ben Johnson as the head coach, where obviously he was the offensive coordinator many seasons with the Lions. So Williams, him and Odunze on the same page. 3 touchdowns for Odunze the first 2 weeks of the season. And they got to get DJ Moore going. And DeAndre Swift's looked decent in the early going. So this week in a matchup versus a Cowboy defense, just got lit up by the New York Giants, one of the worst offenses in the league on paper. I think Caleb Williams goes out there and is a good game. Arizona Cardinals at the 49ers, Kyler Murray a start. You're going to get a mixed bag of results week in and week out for Murray. One good game, one mediocre game. But this week at San Francisco, a team he's very familiar with, Kyler Murray could go out there in San Francisco and be a decent option. And like I said, with all these injuries, Kyler Murray weekly is going to be a top 10, 12 option. Mac Jones is sit. I know last week it was a good game, but it was the New Orleans Saints. He had 3 passing touchdowns. Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings are healthy, but we know George Kittle out. And also Christian McCaffrey, one of the better receiving backs out of the backfield. But this week, even in a decent matchup versus some mediocre defense, I wouldn't trust Mac Jones. Kansas City Chiefs at the Giants Sunday night. Both teams 0-2. Patrick Mahomes, he's off to a good start in terms of fantasy football, but he's missed a lot of throws in the early going. But his rushing yards have come back this season for Mahomes, where he's running over defensive players. We've seen the first 2 games of the year, making plays with his legs. And last week, it would have been a bigger game if Travis Kelce didn't drop that ball off his hands at the 1-yard line and it got intercepted. So this week in a matchup at the Giants where they can't stop anyone, and the first 2 weeks of the season, Jaden Daniels and Dak Prescott had big games. I expect a big one on Sunday night from Mahomes. Russell Wilson a sit. I know last week he turned the clock back 450 yards, 3 touchdowns. Him and Malik Neighbors were locked in that game. Him and Russell Wilson and Wan'Dale Robinson went out there, and he had a monster game as well for the Giants with 8 catches, 142 yards, and a touchdown. But this week in a tough matchup versus Steve Spagnuolo defense, I can't trust Russell Wilson in this one. Detroit Lions at the Baltimore Ravens. Jared Goff, I know he's been a different quarterback on the road than he's been at home, where we saw in week 1 he couldn't get anything going versus the Packers. And this week, it wouldn't be surprising if he takes a step back a little bit. He's Goff. Last week, he was a man possessed out there. 335 yards and 5 passing touchdowns, with 3 of them going to Amon-Ra St. Brown. So this week, tough to bench Jared Goff. Like I said, a lot of injuries at the quarterback position. And let's say you do bench him because you're scared of the matchup and scared he's on the road, and he goes out there and gets, let's say, 250 or 300 yards and 3 TDs. You're going to be kicking yourself. So after coming off a big game, I think you just roll with Goff in this one at the Baltimore Ravens. And now to the Ravens, Lamar Jackson, first quarterback off the board. Matchup proof. Obviously, one of the best quarterbacks in the league and fantasy quarterbacks is Lamar Jackson. And this week versus the Detroit Lions, a defense that week 1 had trouble with Jordan Love. I think Lamar goes out there once again in a high-scoring game between these two teams on Monday night. Has a big game. Stats quarterback start sit every matchup for week 3 of the fantasy football season.